This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello and welcome to today's free CPR Group webinar. We are tackling strategic planning today, and for those of us nerds, nerd is a term of endearment at CPR Group, and for those of us nerds here at CPR Group, strategic planning is one of our favourite topics. Really everything that we do in building the capacity of volunteers within not-for-profit organisations to run better, more successful not-for-profit businesses is tied up in the discussion about strategic planning, whether it's improving committee operations, enhancing governance documentation, rewriting constitutions, looking to plan for better, bigger, more inclusive facilities. All of that stuff can be encapsulated in the strategic planning discussion, even though strategic planning might then lead to other more specific or sophisticated plans in any particular area of operations. So we love strategic planning because it's a really broad opportunity to talk about the range of things that go towards making up a successful not-for-profit business. And I'm using that term very deliberately for those of you familiar with the way that we operate at CPR Group and the sorts of support that we provide to not-for-profit organisations. We really do encourage you to recognise that you're running a business. Yes, it's a not-for-profit business, but that doesn't mean no profit. It doesn't mean you can't make a profit. And as we've covered through various sessions in our free webinar series, we tackle that kind of concept head on, that often there's this misconception in the minds of decision makers in volunteer organisations or not-for-profit entities that their ability to make a profit is limited by virtue of that not-for-profit status. But in actual fact, the only thing that not-for-profit means is that you can't distribute your profits amongst your members. Not-for-profit is very different from no-profit, and indeed for those incorporated associations online today, you'll know that since 2022, there's been a legal duty of management committee members to prevent insolvent trading. So the way we interpret that is that you've got a legal duty to make more money than you spend each year so that you don't run out of money altogether and fall into a position where you're unable to pay your debts as and when they fall due. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Great to see. Thanks, Margaret, for your intro, and Alison as well in the chat, as well as Anne, Karen and Jeff. Feel free to keep those intros coming. If you've got any questions through today's session, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll address them at the end of the session. I'm aiming to leave some time for that towards the end of our hour together. Or thereabouts. So to set expectations, we won't go beyond 1 p.m. If there's some really good discussion happening in the chat, certainly happy to reconnect separately. G'day Tina, thanks for joining us from New Zealand. Great to see we've got people from all over the country here and also across the ditch in NZ today. So great number of attendees, which is always good to see. So my name's Steve Connolly. I'm General Manager at CPR Group. We're a consultancy that is very fortunate to have been able to work with a whole broad range of not-for-profit organisations for the past 30 years, building their business capacity and supporting volunteers and staff to run better not-for-profit businesses. It's, of course, my pleasure to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which we all join today. I'm joining from Cubby Cubby country on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. But before we get into the content, I just want to share with you some of my story of connection to country. And I think it's really nice to start our discussions this way whenever we can, to highlight that we all have a connection to this wonderful country of ours. I was lucky enough to grow up in a small community tucked in amongst the cane fields of Bli, not too far from our head office here on the Sunshine Coast, with my house backing literally onto the Maroochy River. The only thing separating the house from water was a backyard, grass. So as a kid, any chance that I got, I was out on the water with my friends, in the river swimming, on the river fishing, water skiing, up the river camping, really doing anything we possibly could to get outside. Very different from the youth of today. My kids would much rather spend their time indoors on computer games. I really did everything I could to avoid that as a youngster. And given that I almost never wore shoes as a kid, I was quite literally very well connected to country. So as a bit of background, the names Maroochy and Maroochydore are derived from Yagara language terms Murukachi, meaning red bill, the name of the black swan, and Murukachi Da, meaning the place of the black swan. And having spent a lot of time in the Maroochy River, I can tell you that there are indeed a healthy number of black swans getting around the waterways. So the first inhabitants of the Maroochy district were the Cubby Cubby people, and for thousands of years they've hunted in the surrounding ranges, fished the local rivers and gathered seafood from our wonderful ocean at our doorstep. So I offer my deepest respect to the Cubby Cubby people as the traditional custodians of the land from which I join, along with their elders past and present and also emerging leaders. I'd also like to acknowledge the people, place and spirit of all the lands from which you join online today or from which you might be viewing the recording of this session. And finally, I'd like to take a bit of an unorthodox step and acknowledge all of you for the wonderful work that you do every day, delivering critically important services, whether you're a volunteer or staff member in an organisation, whether you're joining from a council or a governing body that provides support to our wonderful population of volunteers across the country and indeed in New Zealand. Without you, our communities would be nothing like what they are today. We talk a lot at CPR Group about the human potential that exists in the world of not-for-profit organisations, and it's a wonderful thing that we're fortunate to have that able to be activated to provide critically important services, activities, events and so on. So thank you. Okay, so strategic planning, what is it all about? Really, a strategic plan provides your organisation with guidelines, prompts and a metaphorical compass for where it's heading. A strategic plan that's actually monitored, tracked and used can help guide your decision making so that you're always heading in the right direction. Otherwise, you might fall into the trap of working on the day-to-day or week-to-week stuff, the urgent things that can often distract us from the important things, without popping your head up and looking towards the horizon. And we talk about a roadmap as a great tool for tracking your progress as well. And if you think about what a roadmap is, back in the day of having a Refidex or a Melways or some, book that had maps and it had an index at the back, so you'd go and find the street that you were looking for and it'd tell you where to find it on the grid reference. And what you might do is take a pencil and you'd start with your origin, where you were leaving from, and you'd map a path to your destination. And you would then ideally have a quick glance as you're tracking, to look at the street names as you're driving along and you see those streets coming off the roads that you're driving along, and make sure that you're tracking okay and that you're still heading in the direction that you set out. What you don't do when you're preparing a roadmap, well, and these days we just put our, a destination into Google Maps and the internet does all of our hard thinking for us. But what you didn't do when you mapped out a path was identify where you were going to stop for fuel necessarily, where you were going to stop to go to the dunny, where you were going to stop to eat. Those were things that you kind of decided along your journey. And a strategic plan is somewhat similar. While we'll talk through a process of action planning in today's discussion, you're not necessarily going to get right down into the nitty-gritty operational planning when you're preparing your strategic plan. Your strategic plan is strategic. It's an overarching roadmap that guides your organisation successfully to its desired destination. But what it does is it provides some flexibility for future committees to help operationalise that plan from one year to the next. Because the way that you think a strategic outcome should be implemented, achieved or operationalised might be a little different from the way that a committee in 3 years' time thinks that certain things should happen. So it's important to acknowledge that you're not getting right down into the nitty-gritty when you're preparing a strategic plan. You're setting a long-term vision, you are creating a roadmap, and you're empowering the next or even successive committees that come after them to come up with the operational action planning to achieve those desired goals that you set out. So a couple of nice touchy-feely little quotes here, or proverbs rather, and this just helps to talk about or point to the reality that when we're doing strategic planning, what we're doing is we're aiming for organisational sustainability. And notwithstanding the images on the screen, I'm not just talking about environmental sustainability there. I'm talking about the sustainability and future success and viability of your club or organisation, which might not be something that you get to enjoy. You might be setting in place now the plan which leads to great success down the track that benefits future members in 5 or 10 or 50 years' time. So I really like the second one there, the Japanese proverb particularly, and it says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago and the next best time is right now, today. And the same is true when we're talking about financial situations in organisations, and volunteers will be lamenting the fact that they've got no money and they've got a whole bunch of stuff to get done that's going to cost money. And we say, wouldn't it be wonderful if you had 50, 100, $1 million in the bank right now, because 50 years ago, your committee set about creating a sinking fund so that you had funds available and ready for eventual asset repair and replacement. Of course, those committee members say, yes, that would be wonderful. And we say, great, so the best time to start that sinking fund was 50 years ago. What's the second best time? Right now. So we're talking about building future success, not only striving to achieve great things today. And this is an important point to acknowledge when we're doing strategic planning, because if the last 3 years, 5 or 6 years, depending on what planning horizon you're working towards, and I typically say shoot for about around a 3-year plan, because particularly with how rapidly the world is changing, it can be difficult to plan much further ahead than that. If you think about how much you got done in the last handful of years, don't aim to do 10 times that amount in the next few years, or you're likely to fall short and be disappointed. So be realistic about what you're able to get done in the immediate term, and rather set in place the steps towards achieving great things in the longer term. It all starts somewhere and sometime. Why not here and now? So I want to now throw to a poll, and you'll get a little poll that'll pop up on your screen. And I want you to just answer this really simple question. Which of the following best describes your organisation's current strategic planning situation? So this will help to give me a bit of a read of where you are all at. So answer based on which of those responses you think best applies to your organisation. And it'll be really interesting to get a bit of a spread. I'm expecting, based on the fact that you're here and involved in this discussion, that you are giving strategic planning some thought, at least. And we're just about there. We've still got some results coming in. I'll close that poll in just a moment. We'll have a look at the spread of results. All right, I'll close that poll in 3, 2, 1. I think we got one more in right at the end there. Great. Okay, I'll share those results so you can see them. So, like I said, we've got a pretty good spread. I'm really glad to see that no one said no idea. At least you're clear on what your current situation looks like. So around a quarter of you said we've got a current up-to-date plan and you're actively following it. That's great. Hopefully you're here because you want to think about the process you're going to set in place to prepare your next strategic plan. And hopefully you've seen the benefits of having a clear roadmap in place for the years that you've been operating in accordance with that plan. Another reasonable group of you said we've got an expired strategic plan that needs to be revised. Again, hopefully you're in a similar situation where you've had some benefit from the plan and you're looking to carry that benefit on. And then the same number of you said respectively, we're currently preparing a plan or we've never had a plan. So it's great to see that those of you who've never had a plan are here as well, and it's good to see that we've got a nice spread. If any of you want to pop a note in the chat and share your experiences in relation to having had a strategic plan and how it's helped you, any significant goals that you've been able to achieve because you had that document front and center and you were mapping your or tracking your progress rather against your roadmap, feel free to pop that share in the chat. It's always nice for people to see some of the benefits that others have experienced. So thank you for sharing your insights there. And it's, like I say, not much of a surprise. We often get a pretty good spread, but it's great to see that you all are very clear on what your current planning situation is. So the next logical question, I'm not going to put this in the poll, but the next question is, why do we need a strategic plan? Why are we preparing a plan? What is it that is the catalyst for us embarking on this planning process? And I suppose we broadly get some variation on these three responses. The first is the answer that we want to hear. We want to hear organisations say, we want to meaningfully guide our organisation towards a successful future. And that's why we need a strategic plan. Unfortunately, we often hear from organisations responses like 2 or 3. Well, look, we want to get grants and we've been told that we need a strategic plan to help us get grants. In actual fact, when we get asked the question, will a strategic plan help us get more grants? The answer is not necessarily. The caveat to that is that if you've got a strategic plan that clearly maps out the highest priority goals, desired outcomes, projects and so on for your organisation, and that plan you can articulate and demonstrate that it's been prepared through a consultative process involving not just your current committee members, but also your broader membership base, maybe council, maybe your governing bodies, maybe other organisations with which you partner. And you can demonstrate that the project for which you're applying for a grant is the highest or one of the highest priority projects in that plan, then that's going to help to make your case in terms of the need for that project. It's a great deal stronger an argument you can mount than, well, we saw this grant was available and we thought we'd like some of that money, so we came up with a project to match. That's not going to stand you in particularly good stead with a funding provider. So being able to demonstrate that there's genuine need for your project by being able to share your strategic plan certainly will help. Now, if you're preparing a plan just because you've got a lease from council and council said you need one, again, I question the level of buy-in that you're going to be experiencing. So if your answer to this question is numbers 2 or 3, just consider that the process can be a whole lot more meaningful for your organisation than just ticking a box. Just saying, yes, we've got a plan so we can apply for grants, or yes, we've got a plan because council or because our governing body said that we need to have one. We advocate strongly for getting real genuine buy-in to the planning process. And sometimes if an organisation or if a member of an organisation comes to us and says, can you help us with a strategic planning process? And we take them through the qualification process to make sure they're actually ready for a strategic planning project. And they tell us things like, look, I'm the only one that thinks this plan's necessary and everyone else on the committee or everyone else in the club thinks it's unnecessary, it's a joke, it's just a waste of time. We'll often say, you're not ready. You're not ready for us. You shouldn't waste your time or your money on our support because it's not actually going to achieve great outcomes. We want to work with organisations that are ready to meaningfully engage in a strategic planning process that will guide them towards future success. So this diagram then is a resource that we'll share with everyone who's involved in today's session, and really it's our roadmap for preparing your roadmap. It's the document that, a really simple one-pager that guides you through the strategic planning process. So if you want to take a screenshot of it, you're more than welcome to do so, but like I say, you'll get a higher resolution PDF copy of this document. And really, this is the process that we broadly follow when we're working with organisations to help them prepare strategic plans, but it's the same process that you can follow. So you'll find plenty of templates from government departments and peak bodies and even private providers like us. The most important thing, regardless of the format that you use or the template that you activate to prepare your plan, is that you'll actually use what you create. So we suggest that you keep your plan as simple as possible. A one-page plan is far more likely to be read, understood, and therefore achieved than a 30, 40, 50-page strategic plan that's just going to collect either physical or digital dust. One of my biggest fears when working with an organisation on a plan is that it will just sit on someone's computer or sit on their cloud, gathering that digital dust that I mentioned. Print the plan out. Put it on your website, stick it on your clubhouse walls, put it next to your canteen menu, bring it to every committee meeting, live it and breathe it, because only then is it front and centre, is it likely to actually be achieved. Plus, the benefits of planning actually come largely through going through the process itself, especially when you can participate by bringing in an external facilitator like us to help you. So some other things to consider for your plan then are things like purpose, like I've touched on, and audience. Is it intended to guide your committee? Is it intended to inform members, or is it intended to tick a box with council or to seek grant investment? Although your plan, like I said earlier, might be focused on a 3 to 5 year planning horizon, also keep in mind what your organisation would like, what you'd like it to look like in 50 years' time. So if you're thinking with a big picture, longer term view, it's okay to document some of that stuff as a longer term vision. The strategic plan that you prepare today might map out the next few years of working towards that longer term vision. So before we get into some of the nitty-gritty of the process then, I want to share with you some insights into the benefits that we get shared with us regarding the planning process. And look, to reiterate, there is absolutely no mandate for you to get external support with your strategic planning process. You can take what we talked through today, you can take the diagram that we'll send you that I just showed you on the screen, and you can prepare your own strategic plan. You can keep it simple, you can be to the point, and it can cost you only time. In our experience, however, here are 5 broad reasons that an organisation usually chooses to engage with us to help them through the strategic planning process. The first one is objectivity. An external facilitator can bring an objective perspective to the process. We can ask you the tough questions that you're not going to ask yourselves. You're likely going to struggle to see the forest through the trees. You're so busy doing the doing and doing a good job of delivering your activities and services that sometimes it can be difficult to take a step out of that and to focus on the future. This is the very reason that when we as CPR Group do strategic planning, we don't do it ourselves. Even though we do this work for our clients, we get an external facilitator in to help us, because our facilitator, whose name is Ralph, he can ask us the tough questions and he can say, why is it that you're doing this particular thing this way? We're never going to ask ourselves that question. The next is in experience and skill sets. An external facilitator has experience working with a range of different organisations and can bring a really broad perspective as well as insights regarding best practice from across the industry to your club's planning process. Plus, facilitating a strategic planning process requires a specific set of skills like communication, by which I mean first and foremost active listening, group facilitation and conflict resolution. And if you're trying to facilitate as well as do the planning, you can sometimes get caught up and not be able to allow yourself, not permit yourself to participate in the planning process itself. The next is focus. We can come in and keep the planning process on track. We can ensure that you stay on target and don't get bogged down in unproductive or worse operational discussions, which I'll come back to in a moment. Time is the other thing. Running a strategic planning process, mainly collating the results of workshops, focus group meetings, member surveys, and preparing a concise but helpful plan can take time, particularly for volunteers who might have limited time to devote to the process itself. You should be able to lean on an external facilitator to put in the hard work so that you can keep your eye on the big picture of doing your job well and get through the process in a timely manner. Otherwise, a strategic planning process for us should take 2 to 3 months all up, but all too often we see that if you leave the work to volunteers, you'll still be waiting for the workshop report this time next year. And finally, and the real important one here, is to get out of the weeds. You need help to shift the focus from the day-to-day operations to the bigger picture and longer-term goals of your club or association. You also need to be able to participate. And like I said earlier, it's difficult to do that when you're also facilitating, meaning that you'll usually find yourself getting drawn down into the weeds. So if you have a thought that you might benefit from external support with your strategic planning process, I'll give you our website at the end of this session. You've all been there to register for today's session anyway, and you can get in touch and we can talk about how we can tailor a process to best meet your needs and to enable you to focus on the stuff that you do best. One of the big traps that we see people fall into when doing strategic planning, particularly when they try to do it themselves, is this notion called roadblock thinking. And we every day see roadblock thinking kill innovation. And there are 3 really common phrases that we hear, and these are phrases that you are from this day henceforth forbidden from speaking yourself. And if you hear other people in your organisation say these things, which you probably will, you've now got, for what it's worth, my permission to call them up and dig a little deeper. So the first phrase of roadblock thinking is, we do it like this because that's how we've always done it. Just because you do something a certain way doesn't mean it's the only way or the best way to do that certain something. New thinking, new perspectives that can be injected during the planning process into the preparation of your strategic plan should really challenge the way that you're doing things. You might be still, keeping handwritten journals and ledgers for your financial record keeping and reconciliation. That's probably taking your treasurer a whole lot more time than it should be, and considering investing a little bit of money to save a whole lot of time in something like Xero or some other hosted bookkeeping package can actually be a really worthwhile investment. The second roadblock thinking phrase we hear all the time is, we tried that once and it didn't work. Again, just because you've tried something once previously and it didn't go so well doesn't in itself mean that it's not worth having another crack. Maybe the people you had in charge weren't the right people. Maybe the timing wasn't right. Maybe there was a global pandemic happening and people were preoccupied dealing with other things. But the third and final phrase that we hear all the time that's my real pet peeve is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. For me, this is a great celebration of mediocrity. Yeah, things are just doing all right. We don't have a whole lot of members. We don't have a whole lot of money. Our facilities aren't all that great. But look, we're doing all right. To take a leaf out of the book of Jim Collins, who wrote a book called Good to Great, he talks about the fact that good can actually be the enemy of great. Because when things are just ticking along all right, the imperative to make things great can be hampered. Whereas when things get really bad and clubs get to the point where they're almost out of money, or they're almost out of members, or they're standing to lose their facilities, that's when people band together and they can become really strong and successful. So I say, if it ain't broke, find a way to make it better. If there are instances of your organisation ticking along and things are just doing all right, that's actually the best time to capitalise. I think it was JFK that said the best time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. Unfortunately, we don't know that the roof is broken until it starts to rain. So if we don't proactively dig into our organisation and find the things that are there and able to be improved upon to save time for volunteers or to improve our level of service delivery for our members or our customers, then things are just going to go on being all right. And at some stage, some other organisation or service provider is going to overtake you. So we should always be striving to improve upon our service delivery, to obsolesce ourselves, to make ourselves, or the way that we used to do things, obsolete by continually improving on those things. So you therefore need to break out and think about what the big picture is. So to start that process then, we advocate really strongly that your organisation needs to start with getting clear on why it actually exists. So every organisation, every person in the world knows what they do. Some businesses know how they do what they do, and that might be their differentiating value proposition or their proprietary process. Unfortunately, very few businesses, including and particularly in the not-for-profit sector, know why they exist. And we as a business were taken on this journey about 10 years ago now, and it took us about 6 months to uncover why we exist. And we started by talking about, you know, the businesses, the organisations, the not-for-profit organisations, the councils, the university clubs and societies with which we work, and talking about making them more successful. And when we dug down a little deeper and started to ask ourselves emotionally why we do what we do, we uncovered it's all about people. We exist to support people in the sport and community sector, to make the lives of volunteers and staff operating in that realm happier. We exist to create happy volunteers. That's why CPR Group exists. That's nothing about what we do. What we do is we deliver training, education, support with planning, we do governance reviews. That's all what we do and some of how we do it. But why we exist drives our behaviour and our decision making. Your organisation should be exactly the same. You can start with the objects in your constitution, but as you'll hear if you listen to our podcast Basket Case Clubs, and I'll give you a little logo at the end of the session today if you're a podcast listening person, you can go and find it at your favourite podcast streaming service. The episode that we've just recorded that'll go live in the coming week or so, we talk about the fact that objects are often focused on what an organisation does. Sometimes they focus on our values and why we exist, and we advocate that the objects in your constitution should be quite emotive and they should be engaging. So they should focus more on why you exist rather than, you know, what you do or how you do it. So this is really the first step in the planning process. Have a discussion about why your organisation exists. If it makes it easier, you can start by writing a list of things that you do, all of your whats, what it is that you do, and then you can link to that and say, why do we do those things? Why is it important? And continue to ask that question, why. Maybe it'll take you 4 or 5 whys to get there. But when you start to uncover the emotional reasons that you stuck your hand up to be involved in the organisation, why you are still there providing voluntary services with your organisation, that's the way that you're going to tap into people's behaviour. We as humans are emotional beings. We make decisions based on emotion and we justify those decisions with logic. So if you can uncover on an emotional level why your organisation exists, you're likely to attract people who believe what you believe and who share your why. And they are people who will form part, a reasonably well-suited part of your organisation's tribe. We're most interested in what connects people with your organisation emotionally. And once you get clear on why you exist, like I said, that can then drive your behaviour. So if we as a business now get opportunities to do work that doesn't align with our why, we'll say no. We will actually reject an opportunity to do a project if it doesn't enable us to deliver on our purpose as a business. And your organisation can be the same. Next, it's time to talk about our goals. And goal setting is the most fun part of strategic planning. It enables us to really draw back the curtains and look through the window into the future. You might have goals for big, ambitious outcomes like a new clubhouse, or you might want to increase to 1,000 members, or you might want to be the best model train society in the country. Each person's goals within your organisation might also be different, and this is critically important. Someone on your committee might think that your club should double in size and become the biggest and best club in your city. But another person might want to protect what makes your club unique, which might be lost in expansion and size. So have these conversations meaningfully, because there might be a way to have both. Now, we've done strategic planning projects with organisations where in the planning workshop, in the first planning workshop, it came to light that there was misalignment, significant misalignment amongst committee members. One example is a gymnastics club, and gymnastics is a sport that offers participation opportunities on a pretty broad spectrum, right from, our little kinder gym kiddies just getting started with some, functional movements, right up to Olympic participation and competition. And there's a lot in between. Now, clubs that deliver gymnastics fall somewhere on that spectrum, and sometimes they actually appear at various areas on that spectrum. They might be an organisation that gets kids in, they might do some prehab and rehabilitation activities for people in the older cohort or demographic, and then they might also have some really elite competitive athletes as well as part of their ranks. But it's important that an organisation knows where it fits on that spectrum in the world of gymnastics, to stick with this example. And during this planning process, it came to light that a couple of committee members were so misaligned with the rest of the committee that they actually resigned. They decided that it was not right for them to remain in their committee position because they identified that they'd be actually fighting against the goals or strategic direction of others on that committee. So it's really important to go through this planning process, like I said earlier. So once you've got the big picture in mind, you can then develop the steps you'll need to take to get there. Then the big picture should not be as daunting or as scary, because you've identified the little steps you need to take today through your action planning, which we'll talk about shortly, which are leading to your shared vision for the future. So there are different types of goals then. We have doable goals, stretch goals, and possible goals. Doable goals are achievable now, given our current resources and resourcefulness. It's relatively easy to achieve doable goals, and there might be things like adopting or creating some basic policies, a code of conduct, member protection policy, updating our membership application form, and so on. These are goals that we can achieve as long as we just don't suck. As long as we don't go backwards, we're going to achieve those goals. These doable goals, though, can be designed to fix those little annoying barriers that pop up every year, but which we don't address, and nothing's put in place to counter them. Stretch goals then go a little further, and these are the goals where we could do them, but we'd have to shake some things up first. We'd have to make some change, and they push us just a little outside our comfort zone. And being uncomfortable is actually okay, and we suggest a good thing. This might include goals such as restructuring your organisational chart, having less committee members and more operational roles. So moving towards a leaner board of say 5 or 7, away from a management committee of 12 or 15, and then creating some dedicated subcommittees and volunteer operational roles, maybe even a paid role or two. So that's a stretch. We might be needing, like I say, to get a little bit uncomfortable. But then we've got the possible goals, and this is where the really exciting stuff happens. This is the big picture thinking that comes from really creative brainstorming. It's possible, but it might be really hard. So we were once working with a club, a soccer club in regional Australia, and they said, look, we've got 250 members today, and the main reason that we want to do this strategic plan is because we want to grow membership. And we said, great. What do you want to grow to? They said, we want to grow by 10% over 3 years. We want to have 275 members in 3 years' time. And then after trying to stifle our chuckles, we said, okay, you told us that membership growth was your primary aim through this strategic planning process. Yet here we are having a planning discussion, and you've told us that over 3 years, you want to grow by only 10%. Really? You could grow by 10, recognizing you're going to have some natural attrition, some members are going to leave the organization. You could grow by that 10% over 3 years by simply not sucking, simply not doing enough to scare more than the typical attrition rate number of members away from the club. And given that soccer's or football is one of those sports that is pretty popular and, you know, increasingly so given the growing concerns around head injuries in some of our more physically strenuous and contact-driven sports, you're just really maybe not aiming high enough, especially given that this is the catalyst for this planning process. So we said, why don't you aim to grow to 2,500 members? And of course, they recoiled and were really scared by that number, and they said, oh my goodness, we could never grow to 2,500 members. How could we possibly achieve that? And we said, well, why couldn't you achieve that? They said, well, we don't have enough fields. We don't have enough change rooms. We don't have enough facilities, broadly speaking. We certainly don't have enough people. We don't have enough volunteers. We don't have the money. And what they had started to do in that discussion was start to identify all of the things that they'd need to work on in order to have the capacity to grow to 2,500 members. Now, they might fall well short of 2,500 members, and they might grow to 500. But that's a whole damn sight better, given that their primary aim, and they had agreed amongst themselves that membership growth was a critically important focus of theirs. We weren't imposing that desire or goal onto them. It was their desire. And we really challenged them. They would have never thought about growing to 2,500 members themselves. Fast forward 10 years, that club now has about 650 members. So if they had have just changed nothing, to be honest, and aimed for 10% growth over a few years, the likelihood of them achieving that was pretty great. But it's also a hamstringing consideration in that they've missed out on the opportunity to grow exponentially, which they've now achieved. When you view this exercise of goal setting like this, they're not barriers necessarily as much as they are a list of things that you can work on to achieve that really big, audacious, and somewhat scary goal. Goals, however, could be, and this is something that I alluded to earlier, about consolidation. If your organisation, your business, is not ready to build massive facilities or grow to 2,500 people, what areas need attention? And 3 years of hard work to consolidate a really strong position, financially, membership-wise, relationships, partnerships, and so on, sets you up for the next 3 for growth. That can be a really important consolidation period. But if you go straight for growth when your business isn't firing on all cylinders, you might find that you fall well short, and you might find that you actually make your lives a lot more difficult. So recognize that consolidation can be a really important step. And for a lot of organizations that come to us for help, they're in a situation where they actually need support to get their house in order before they can aim for significant growth. That brings us to what some people see as a dreaded acronym, the SWOT analysis. Now, a SWOT analysis is largely or often 4 lists. A list of the things that you do well and that are in your control, your strengths. A list of the things that you control but you don't do as well as you probably should. A list of things that could go well for you and could be good, but may not be in your control, and then threats. The things that could cause problems for you at some stage in the future, and which also might not be in your control. This list of lists is not necessarily effective unless you actually take the next step of thinking about what you need to do to fix the problems and capitalize on the good stuff. So one of our really powerful planning tools is our dynamic SWOT. And if you're interested in finding out more about how it makes all the difference in operationalizing the results of your SWOT, you'll need to bring us in to help. What I want to do is give you a sneak peek now though. This is the quadrants of the dynamic SWOT tool. So you'll see the y-axis is, the y-axis is the stuff that you control and don't control. So if you're over on the right-hand side of the y-axis, then you're talking about things that are within your control. And this is a spectrum. Things that are closer to the right-hand side of that y-axis are things over which you exercise lots of control. The further towards the left that you go, the lesser the control you exercise over that particular operational area. So things that exist on the left side of this diagram are things that you can't control. It might be the weather. But what you can control are things like how you weatherproof your facilities, how you enhance the drainage of your playing fields, whether you've got a roof over your courts and so on. Things that you don't control might be whether someone joins your club or not. You can't control that, but what you can control is how appealing and awesome your club looks to potential members. So everything then in the top, and everything above the line is stuff that you're doing well. Everything below the line on this x-axis then is stuff that you're not doing well, things that you're bad at, to use really simple terminology. So everything in the top right quadrant of the diagram are the things that are good, and they're good because we do them well. And you might call those strengths. So the idea of this tool and the way that we guide organizations through the use of this tool during the strategic planning process is to plot operational areas or business units onto this diagram based on where they fall on the spectrum of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, not simply trying to compartmentalize them into one of those specific 4 lists. So a really high level list then of the sorts of operational areas that we plot on this dynamic SWOT tool are those on the screen now. This is not an exhaustive list. We suggest that you use these as a guide and drill in where you really need to. When we use the SWOT analysis, we always advocate for using either a whiteboard or a really big piece of paper, because the idea of the tool is that you plot each of these operational areas and maybe anything else that you come up with on this diagram. And you put those things based on where they fall in terms of your level of control or otherwise over them, and how good or bad you rate your performance in delivering those activities, services, events, and so on. What we then do is we draw a line from where that particular operational area exists today on this diagram to where you want it to be. And then we start to talk about the ways that we're going to move that particular operational area from where it is to where we want it to be. So if you want to know more, feel free to get in touch and we'll be happy to talk about how we can take you through that dynamic SWOT planning tool. But like I say, it's a fantastic way to take your goals and to operationalize them and to actually turn them into actionable outcomes, which leads us to the action planning. So the action planning is where we should be able to take our SWOT and easily convert our ideas from that SWOT into actions. We're not trying to get everything perfect. And this relates back to the comment that I made at the start of today's discussion, which is recognize that you're doing strategic planning. You're not doing operational planning. We'll leave that to you as the current committee for this year and maybe next year's committee for that year and so on. We don't want to be too prescriptive in saying exactly how we want to achieve the things that we set out to achieve in our strategic plan. We want to get some ideas down quickly, then come back and add details when we have ideas for each of those extra things on our SWOT. So you can see here in the way that we've asked these questions, and you can see this is a snapshot from the diagram that you'll receive a copy of, we're really digging into the SWOT analysis. We're trying to uncover what we can do to capitalize on our strengths, the things that we're doing well. What can we do to address our weaknesses and improve upon those? Or what can we do to chase opportunities and protect ourselves from potential future threats? So the action plan can really set out as much or as little detail as you wish in terms of the actual action to achieve the goal that you've set, specifying when you want that action to happen. And you might prioritize actions as low, medium, or high priority. You might say this year, next year, or future. You might say 2025, 26, 27. The way that you place a time frame around your actions is entirely up to you. And again, you might not even want to put a time frame on your actions. You might just say, here's all the stuff that we've got to do, and we're going to consider at each committee meeting which of those actions is the highest priority for us right now. So, and that is a great way to ensure that you're living and breathing your strategic plan, that it's a dynamic document. Now, we advocate for really pretty strategic plans that are nice, visually appealing documents that are attractive to read for your members or other stakeholders. But in reality, a simple plan in a Microsoft PowerPoint or a Microsoft Word document can be far easier to update and track your progress against, and can therefore be more actionable in a dynamic sense. So don't think that if you're preparing your own plan that it needs to be this, magazine quality, beautiful published document. It can be really simple. And in fact, the most important thing is that you've got your roadmap. The roadmap can be as ugly as a piece of pencil on your old roadmap, but it needs to be able to have progress monitored and tracked against it, which is the most important element. So rather than preparing your mission, your vision, and your values early on in the planning process, we suggest, and our planning diagram that you'll get has this out to the side, because too many groups get way too bogged down on this stuff and end up with a mission and a vision and values like everyone else. And they're wordy and they don't really articulate why the organisation exists or what it strives to achieve. So here's how we define these three elements. We say that your mission is a summary of your why. So once you've got your why, that might be a sentence or two, if you can summarize, or it might be dot points, it might be a list of why you exist. If you can summarize that down into a succinct sentence, then that's your mission. That's why you exist. That's your purpose as an organization. Your vision is, as you can see in all caps there, it's what you want the future to look like. It's your vision for the future. Your values then reflect how you're going to behave in achieving your vision. Now, when it comes to creating values, we suggest you try and make them practical and easy to understand rather than just single word values. So values that we often see that organizations have might be things like respect or transparency or accountability. But they could be interpreted a whole bunch of different ways. So making them more practical might lead you to say things like, we will treat everyone with respect, including opponents, officials, and fellow club members. That's actionable. That's how we're going to behave. We create a welcoming environment that promotes diversity and inclusivity. We can track our progress against that value, against that established, agreed set of behaviours. We will be a proactive and positive member of the local community and contribute to its growth and development. That's a value. So don't overthink your mission, vision, and values, and don't let AI prepare your mission, vision, and values without some human intervention. Yeah, get some thoughts from AI, and if you've got a list of all of your dot point list of why you exist, your purposes as an organisation that you've come up through a collaborative process, drop them into AI and say, help me come up with a succinct why statement here. But it's likely that it's going to come up with a pretty wordy, maybe not particularly meaningful, and certainly not necessarily going to be reflective of your organisation's personality. So ensure that if you get help from AI, that you ensure that human overlay and that you map out what it is that you actually believe, how you're going to live and breathe your strategic plan through your mission, vision, and values. So get some help from AI, but don't let it write it for you. Because I can now read a strategic plan that has been written with significant support from AI, and I can tell that it's just dumped out of a digital system, digital intelligence system, rather than actually speaking from the heart about an organisation's current situation and desired future direction. That brings us to the end of our formal content for today. I want to share with you the next 3 sessions that we've got scheduled in our free webinar series rather. The 19th of June, we're talking about scaling your club for success. Really kind of building on today's discussion, particularly about those possible goals and drilling down into the ways that we've seen organisations build upon their current situation to achieve great success for the future. On the 24th of July then, we're talking about maximising multi-use facilities, and this is a growing challenge in Australia and in New Zealand for organisations that exist and operate from community land, whereby councils, typically speaking, for very good reason, want to maximise utilisation. And that means that we often don't just have one organisation using a facility any longer, but rather we've got a range of organisations that need to share a facility and to optimise their own delivery of services through the provision of activities at those facilities. So we've been working for, like I say, almost 30 years with councils, with governing bodies, with organisations on the ground to ensure practical, workable solutions for multi-use. And sometimes things go really pear-shaped because of humans, emotional beings that are there activating those facilities. And it's critical that we set in place some good structure to guide multi-use of facilities. So we'll be tackling that on the 24th of July. And this is not the final session on the 21st of August, but it's just the next in the series, Unlocking Club Funding. So we'll be talking about grant funding and what your organisation can do to put yourself in the greatest position possible for when funding programs open. Rather than scrambling following opening date, trying to build a project at the same time that you're writing a grant application, we'll be talking all about getting grant ready in that session on the 21st of August. We do then have a few more sessions. You can see the URL at the top of your screen there, cprgroup.com.au/webinars. You're all very familiar with that link because that's where you went to register for today's session. Head back there, and I know that a lot of you have already registered for some of those sessions. You can register for some or all of them at that link there, so feel free to jump in and do so. All right, let's jump over to the chat and see if we have got any questions in here. I'll scroll back up to the top. Okay. Thank you all for your intros. Great to see we've got a really good cross-section here across the sporting and community landscape. Danielle, thanks for your question from the City of Rockingham over in WA. Welcome, great to see you online. Will the slides from today be made available? You'll actually get a copy of the recording. So what we'll do is all the people who are here today and have participated in the live session, you'll get a link to go and access the recording from the session, so you can share that with any others in your organisation that may have missed out, and you'll be able to access that just simply via YouTube. So yes, in a way, the slides will be available. It looks like that's the only question in there, so I'll leave that chat running for a little while longer. I'll leave you with a link to our website as well as a little logo there that points you to Basket Case Clubs. Like I say, that's our podcast during which we talk about some of the challenges that clubs face that lead them to be basket case clubs, but we also share tips, tricks, insights and support for organisations based on organisations that we've seen go from being a basket case club to becoming a showcase club. So it's not all negative, it's not all doom and gloom. We do talk a lot about tips and tricks based on what we've seen over our decades of working with clubs and community sporting associations to make those organisations better, more successful businesses. You can head to our website, cprgroup.com.au, follow the link to contact us if you do have any questions or if you want to get in touch to talk about how we might be able to help you with your strategic planning process, recognising that you certainly can do it yourself. You'll get a copy of the strategic planning diagram post today's session, and we'll be really happy to answer any questions that you might have about that process following on from today's session. And if you want to share the love, it's always great for us when we get some 5-star reviews on Google. It helps to let other people know that we're out there and we can help them. Often when we work with volunteers who are 5 years into their committee role, for instance, they say, "Where were you 5 years ago? I've been struggling and had no idea that a consultancy like this existed. I work in government or I work in industry and we use consultants for support in certain operational or project-based areas. I didn't know that there was support in the community sector." So we are here and we love hearing from organisations that either are going well and want to go from being good to becoming great, or less satisfactory is when organisations are struggling, but knowing that we're there to help and provide support for them is a hugely rewarding element of our work. So feel free to head over to Google using that QR code and give us a review. Always love to hear from the people who've been along to these sessions. And again, a sincere thanks to you all for giving up an hour of your time today. Depending on which time zone you're in, it might be over your lunch break, it might be in the morning or afternoon. It's been wonderful to have such a good cross-section of people online today. It's a little bit impersonal, this webinar format, in that you've only got the ability to engage in the chat. But if you want to get in touch, we've got a 1-800 number on our website. You can give us a call. We are real humans. We will answer that phone and we will talk with you through any questions, concerns, or ideas for future improvement that you might have. So thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you online for the next session in our series of free webinars. And for those of you who we are working with directly, I look forward to connecting with you again in the coming days. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.